Hi, my name is Brett James, Principal of Sussex Strategy Group, and welcome again to our Sussex Election 43 show. Today I have the pleasure of discussing the cannabis marketplace in Canada, in particular medical cannabis and the research end of the world, with Dr. Guy Chamberland of Tetra BioPharma. Full disclosure, he's a client of Sussex Strategy Group, and we've been working together now for more than a year. But perfect guest for us to talk about one of the hot topics, I guess, in public policy over the last few years in Canada, and in particular since legalization hit last October. Maybe less relevant directly to your business, but that's been a main driver of the conversation. And welcome, and please tell us a little bit about Tetra BioPharma.
Well, thank you very much, Brett, for having me on. Tetra BioPharma has been around since 2014. The company basically went from becoming a licensed producer applicant in the early years, 2014 to 2016, till I joined the company along with one of my colleagues, and we decided to change the business model. So we basically converted Tetra BioPharma into a real pharmaceutical company that specializes in developing cannabinoids and cannabis-based drugs for the market. That's basically who we are.
So in that regards, as it relates to Canadian public policy and the licensing side of the world, you focused exclusively on the medical market, correct?
Correct. So we have no license to, grow or sell cannabis in the country. Everything we do is research with clinicals, institutions, hospitals, physicians, and work with Health Canada to bring the products as prescription drugs to the market.
Now, as a firm, we've worked in this space since the early days of the changes in regulation and the creation, moving from the MMAR growers that existed for personal medical growing to ACMPR through to the current licensing regime. And what I've seen is, over that time, there has been, a lack of clinical research that existed to give comfort for both regulators in licensing products on the pharmaceutical side or the medical side, but also to doctors to prescribe. Tell us a little bit about that evolution and your role in it.
Sure. Basically, when we started our clinical research, so since 2016, the company has done 5 clinical trials. We've completed 4 of them already. So we're probably one of the most advanced companies in the world developing cannabis prescription drugs. Back before the legalization, it was a simple world for us. We were developing cannabis as any other drug. So basically just like morphine when it was an investigational drug, it went through, we had to work with the Controlled Substance Division of Health Canada, the Office of Clinical Trials, and then if the evidence was there, it would get approved. Post-legalization, life changed for the whole industry. It was supposed to make, life easier for physicians and companies like ours, where you would have to get approval from the Office of Clinical Trials like before. So that hasn't changed. But the Office of Controlled Substance lost the responsibility of cannabis. It basically got shifted to the whole cannabis group. Because of short staffing, we went from a delay of being able to start a trial from 2 to 4 weeks post-trial approval to get what we call the Section 56 to now over 6 months delay to get a trial up and running, which is now a lot slower than the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. So it's pushing companies like ours to reconsider their business model and consider moving certain of our, strategies to the U.S. and even to Europe.
I want to come back to that dynamic, but I find it particularly interesting because on the license side, for those that have applied to be licensed producers, whether they be growing for the medical market or the recreational market, if I go back a few years, the complaint was the slow licensing processes. It was backlogged. Many people had invested millions of dollars, were waiting. Health Canada shifted the resources, as you described, to that licensing side, improved the process significantly. It still maybe could use some improvements, but they've done a very good job. But in the process, what I'm hearing is the resources, as they shifted, have left that licensing on the pharmaceutical side for medical purposes lacking in resources and made a change there.
Well, for me, I've been in the industry now since 1995 in the pharmaceutical industry. So they didn't need to touch the clinical trial aspects. It was working well before. If they wanted information for whatever obligations they had with the United Nations for the quotas of THC or whatever, they just had to ask, the Office of Clinical Trials to provide them the information. But if you had a functional system that you could get trials running in anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, why would you want to change that or touch that? What all of society was missing to remove kind of the negative stigma around cannabis is getting clinical research. Now, if a company is having problems getting it through because of delays, imagine a physician in a university. Mm-hmm. And we know from multiple exchanges with physicians and research institutes, they have worse problems than we do. So for them, it's even worse than our situation. So in actual fact, the new regulations have not helped society learn more about cannabis. We've actually frozen all of the clinical research in Canada. And that's a common complaint of even some of the big licensed producers as well. Sure. That try to do research.
Growing pains, I suppose. I mean, certainly all along, government's been trying to figure this out while institutions and companies have been trying to figure it out at the same time. So it's kind of gone hand in hand. This is an election show, so I want to touch on the various position of the major parties. As I look at platforms, or what's been announced to date at least, we certainly know what the Liberal approach is because they've been implementing it over the last 4 years. Mr. Scheer, it seems, has gone from his party opposing legalization in the early days to saying he would continue down this same path, and in fact also continue with pardons for those that were indicted on offenses or convicted on offenses. And similarly, the NDP. Sitting where you sit and making plans and having to assess risk in an election period, do you foresee any significant change, and how do you plan for that?
Well, for us, in the fact we've been developing them as prescription drugs. So tomorrow morning, as long as you don't touch the Food and Drug Act, it normally wouldn't have an impact on us. Obviously, legalization did, like we were just mentioning before. So for me, any government that comes in, what we would hope from them is that they would adequately staff the Cannabis Directorate so we can get clinical research up. Fundamentally, it's what, as as executives in charge of the health of the citizens, that they need that research. They need to be sure that consumers who are enjoying the benefits of cannabis are actually safe. And if you don't get the clinical research to come from universities, then that remains a black box. And I think that'll always keep a negative stigma on cannabis until we can facilitate the research. And to me, I think it would be in the interests of the Liberals, the Conservatives, or the NDP to staff the government adequately.
So if you had one ask of an incoming government in October, is it resources?
It would be either put the resources or on the clinical side, leave it to the people that were running it before, because they were obviously doing a good job before.
Okay. Now, I know you've been spending time, in particular in the United States and maybe elsewhere, looking at opportunities. What do you, given the dynamic that we've just discussed, does Canada risk losing a leadership position, and what do you see happening elsewhere that could affect your ability to invest and stay leading in Canada?
Well, definitely as CEO of a company, if the government does not change the delay in getting a clinical trial up and running, it's easier for me to run my clinical trials in the States. So obviously my jobs will be moving to the United States that are in the clinical research area. Right now, the delay, if a site has its cannabis license, and some do, so we do find investigators that have their DA license, so I can import into the States for research, and I have no delays. So I just have the U.S. drug approval to run my trial, which is 4 weeks, and I'm up and running. So as a public company, you're looking a 6-month advantage, and that's assuming Health Canada can deliver a license in 6 months, which they still have to prove they have, because they haven't yet. I ran a trial. We applied for a trial in November of 2018, and I still don't have my license to run it.
But 4 to 6 weeks in the United States
Yes.
for that approval, and you're up and running.
So as a business,
Right.
public company, I can't wait for those delays.
Right.
For a government, it may be acceptable to say, well, we'll staff it in the coming years, but as a business, you can't. You have to grow and be competitive. If I slow down, a small U.S. company may now decide, okay, look, he's slowing down for whatever reasons, we can catch up with them. According to the stock analysts, we've been 2 to 3 years ahead of even the big licensed producers. We have to maintain that speed.
Mm-hmm. Is it similar then when you look to Europe and other places where, you know, the recreational legalization may not have happened, but there's, it seems every week there's a new country that is going down the road on the medical side?
Well, for us, if there is or there isn't any cannabis regulations has never affected us before because we've always operated under the drug regulations. So just when Health Canada changed that here, when they removed the Section 56 and gave it to the Cannabis Directorate, that changed our lives. But when they put them actually on the prescription drug list, they actually were trying to facilitate our life because it was no longer a controlled substance.
When it was all done under the drug licensing system, were there any cannabis-based drugs that were listed?
Yes, we were doing a lot of, well, Sativex had been conditionally approved in Canada. That was the first one. More than 10 years ago, there was dronabinol that had been approved, which was a synthetic THC. There was Nabalon, which is a derivative of that as well, that's been approved and still approved in Canada. So the process was working very well. There was no reason to tamper with it.
Now, so if Canada was to fix that licensing regime and be able to support your clinical trials in a faster way, what does it mean for your growth and investment in Canada?
Well, our growth would be here. So we wouldn't be looking to start a facility in the United States. We'd be investing the money in different regions of Canada where we're located, which is Atlantic Canada, here in Ottawa, and as well as in Quebec in the Montreal area. And we would do the growth. I mean, Montreal has grown to be one of the world's hubs in clinical research for phase ones. There's multiple clinical research organizations there. So we have the talent. It's not that we're missing the talent. Sometimes in some business domains, you don't have the talent in Canada, so you have to go outside. Right. But in this case, we do. So we'd actually be losing potential jobs here in Canada.
So there you have it, some simple prescriptions for improving the process in Canada to keep jobs and investment here. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand the baton to my colleague Hugues Terrouet, and Hugues is going to speak to Dr. Chamberland en français for our French clients and Francophone clients across the country. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Brett.